Within this study, we looked at social work engagements and also youth offending team engagements with Roma migrants. I'm going to be fairly fast, so apologies for those speaking your third, fourth or fifth language, and hopefully you'll be able to understand me fairly easily. Okay, so what I want to talk about is a little bit about the background of the project, methodology and some of the key themes which have arisen from the literature review, and also from our work interviewing Roma migrants from a variety of countries, NGO support workers, social workers and youth offending teams. And social work professionals' responses, because when we did a very small presentation here in Manchester nearly 2 years ago now, actually, at the beginning of the project, social workers said, but you're not listening to us. So we also put out a survey to social workers to ask about their opinions and challenges of working with the Roma community. I'm a policy practitioner by background, as some of you know, which means I'm more of a technician than an academic. So it's about the nuts and bolts of how do we change it. So I'm going to talk a bit about policy challenges and recommendations as well. Okay, so historically, as you probably all know, there's been a very high levels of intervention, removal of children into care across a number of countries, and both northern countries, Italy, Ireland. There's been some quite high publicised cases with Blonde Maria in Ireland recently. We know national Roma integration strategies, which obviously focus on the 4 key areas, which all impact on the potential for social work engagement, accommodation, health, employment and education. And there are also associated policy emphasis on children's rights. And I've only mentioned their EU ones rather than the broader sort of charters. But despite this, there's this large increase in safeguarding and child protection interventions for Roma. And there's some data there from the ERC, European Roma Rights Centre, and you can see the phenomenally high levels of Roma children who are in care. And in fact, very recently, last year in Norway, the Human Rights Commission noticed that nearly 50% of Roma children living in Oslo are either in state care, have been removed from their parents, or on the at-risk register. So it's a huge problem. And in fact, I will say part of the reason I wasn't here for the very early papers is because I was actually dealing with an inquiry from a social worker this morning who emailed me to say that he was actually putting in a report to challenge the decision or suggestion that a child should be removed into care, and could I please let him have some references for evidence in order to support the idea of the child remaining at home. So it's a really hot topic and very important. This is just from the BBC, and you can see there's been this was last year, and you can see there's been quite a lot of publicity and discourse around this idea of Roma children being taken into care, and it's highly negative, and which obviously impacts on the impression which is given to social workers, other professionals, NGOs, and those people who are part of the care system. And particularly the discourse tends to focus on Romanian Roma, and in Manchester a few Romanian Roma were interviewed. Elsewhere it was Czech, Slovak and Polish Roma. But certainly there's this increased narrative about children moving here and then being removed into state care. I'm not going to talk about youth offending data as such, but I think it's very much worth mentioning that there's also an overrepresentation of young Roma people throughout the criminal justice system internationally. And for those who are interested, I would refer you to the 2 reports that came out in April 2015, which were supported by EARNS and Council of Europe, my own university, where we looked at health and social care and also the criminal justice system. So although we know anecdotally there's large numbers of children in the care system and also in the criminal justice system in broader Europe, it's very, very difficult to disaggregate this information. We're largely working on anecdotal evidence because it's often unlawful to actually hold those data by ethnicity. So, for example, Eurostat talks about children in care and in the criminal justice system, but doesn't actually sort of specify who's of Roma origin. However, you can see that I've given you a few quotes from various reports talking about disproportionate numbers of Roma in prison, European Committee Against Torture, most prisoners are Romani, and that's actually a youth offending centre with appalling conditions which has been condemned. Okay, and again here you can see I've just sort of found another from 2010, quite old, which feeds into this narrative talking about deportations, this bordering concept, because of the increase in crime perpetrated by Roma. And that's even if we don't necessarily have the clear data about how many Roma are in the prison system. However, in the UK and in Ireland, we're very fortunate because we have the largest fullish data sets. We know there's an undercount in terms of Roma, Gypsy and Traveller prisoners who self-identify by ethnicity. And again, I've cited that report, we talk about it in depth. But what we do have is data in a secure state, i.e. prison and youth offending services. And we know that although Gypsy and Traveller people in the UK account for less than 1% of the population, they're 5% of prisoners, in adult prisons, 7% of female prisoners, and very, very high for youth provision. And in some areas, for example, in Kent, a youth offending facility is 22% of the population. More recent figures suggest 8%. Roma are harder to identify within these data sets simply because of the fact they're not listed as Roma per se, they're listed by nationality, so Bulgarian, Romanian, whatever. But what we do have is emergent evidence and people working in the secure state to suggest, again, very high numbers of Roma prisoners. So in the Bridging the Gap report, we had Can Yildiz, who is a prison social worker, saying 70% of the inner London female prisoners she was working with were of Roma ethnicity, who were largely in prison for crimes of acquisition and begging. So, turning now to social work, this is the data here in the UK for Gypsy, Traveller and Roma young people. We do actually have a collapsed category of Gypsies and Roma, so that's English Romani and Roma children in the care system. And certainly anecdotally, as we understand it, is a vast increase in Roma migrant children, which is driving between 2009 and the most recent data, which came out in September last year. So you can see there's a huge increase. Travellers of Irish heritage have again increased in numbers in care, but not as substantially. But you can see there's definitely a significant problem. So what do we do in this project? It's a pilot study, and it's quite complex. We've got a lot of areas. We did a literature review where we looked at existing EU literature and a very small amount that's here in the UK. We held focus groups in a large urban area, in London, in fact, and Derby, which has got a large Roma population with Roma service users in contact with social work or youth offending. And we had 12 participants, Polish, Slovak, Czech and Serbian. We also did a series of individual interviews and small group discussions with youth offending teams in 2 localities, we had someone from Manchester and also from Derby. Individual interviews in 3 localities, Roma service users who were Roma, Czech and Slovak, and also 10 support staff, and that's in one area. We had focus groups with support agency staff and volunteers from NGO and an e-survey of social workers. We were also able to access the document review from the NGO we worked with because they provide some training for social workers in terms of cultural competence and supporting and engaging with Roma who've come into contact with the care system. And they've actually trained 169 people in 7 localities, so we were able to draw upon some of those themes. So what's the supporting literature? Well, unsurprisingly, there's language barriers to engagement with Roma migrants. There's a lack of understandable info and translation, but there's also what I call system illiteracy. So clients who come into contact really just do not know what's going on quite often, and I'm going to give you a few quotes in a minute. There's a lack of a statutory sector workforce with Roma staff who can work and support community members. Huge distrust of the system and external non-Roma society by Roma clients, unsurprisingly. There's this big conflict between what is expected, acculturation, cultural change, often imposed externally by the agencies who want someone to behave in a particular manner, and enculturation, so socialisation, how actually to work with the system in a manner which brings about the best results, and will often then mean that a child does not go into care, can be supported at home with the family, or will have a community sentence, perhaps, rather than going into prison. We've also sort of started drawing out a theme that says some Roma community members are hiding problems because they're just stigma within the community of actually acknowledging as issues such as particular forms of crime or substance misuse. And again, this theme of fast-tracking to youth offending and custody for Roma, but that's particularly in Central and East Europe, we've obviously with disproportionality, we're seeing that to some extent in the UK, but it doesn't seem to be as dramatic. And certainly the youth offending team members we've spoken to seem very keen to learn more to be able to support young people within the community to avoid them going to prison. Okay, victimisation of Roma. Okay, so, you know, it's their problem. In other words, we don't change the system, we change the people. And again, importantly, this whole narrative of antisocial behaviour. And you see, I've highlighted there, that's linked very much to the discussion on Operation Gulf, which Sharon was talking about yesterday. We've also seen increasing numbers of safeguarding board guidance. That's the guidance going out to social workers, which talks about this international focus. It draws upon this literature that says there's this early marriage risk, there's this risk of trafficking, and CSE, that's child sexual exploitation. And I've given you a couple of papers. And in another report in 2015, it talked about Romanian migrant children being a particular at-risk group with a subtext that very strongly it's Roma, although there were only a few paragraphs that actually explicitly referred to Roma children being at risk of child sexual exploitation. Common themes here: poverty, of cultural poverty and stigma, and other findings from literature: lack of culturally sensitive services, and some suggestions of need for greater mediation. So, looking here quickly at our topic guide and interview schedule, I'll skim through this, you can read it yourself, but really we asked about respondents' contacts with social workers or youth offending teams, how they came into contact, how the service could be improved, experience of contact, why a young Roma person might become looked after in childcare system or in contact, and whether there should be more whole family services and cultural competence. So what did we find in terms of the key themes that came out? So from both Roma community members and also support workers from NGOs, we found that there's particular triggers of concerns over neglect, and neglect is typically associated with poverty regardless of which community we're talking about. We could be talking about Orthodox Jews, we could be talking about white English. That's the main reason children end up in the care system. And there's a quote there, this is D, that's the mid-sized town Derby. There was a woman, second focus group, and you can see she said because she's living in very overcrowded accommodation that this became an issue of social work concern. There was a strong stress on poverty, poor housing, and this leading to social work intervention, and a downward spiral. Pre-migration circumstances and state of health that came before, and poor housing was stressed repeatedly by all of the respondents. When social work intervention does occur, people spoke about the lack of support in relation to underlying stressors, the things that led them into contact, such as accommodation and welfare benefits. And we've got a sort of other side project on welfare benefits, and again, the report's due out quite soon. There was some reference to a failure to provide a wraparound support. So, for example, in some countries, such as Romania, people talked about social workers who might not get involved until things are bad, but they would try and help with housing or access to other services. And that's perceived to evolve quite differently here without sort of all of that access necessarily fall into place. We also found people don't have much knowledge about the state systems that exist. So here's a Polish man, and the Polish Roma community have been here longer, tend to be better integrated, generally seem to have a higher level of education and employment. And he said the new people, he's talking here about Czechoslovak and Romanian migrants, they don't know it's important to register children with GPs, that's medics for those who aren't from here. They don't know the culture and language, they don't have the contact, they just don't know how to get help. Another Polish man, this is a different focus group, these people, social workers, youth offending teams, they're professionals. We, as a community, as Roma, we're not used to dealing with professionals on a day-to-day basis. And from an NGO staff member in the second focus group with those working to support Roma, there's this profound lack of information. They don't know about the process, their rights, they don't know they can request things, they don't know they can ask for a change as social workers. And importantly, this theme here, the same person said, what I find more frightening and worries me more is they can't differentiate between who's coming to the house and what role they have. They just don't know. It's just a lady or a man with a badge. And people, professionals, often don't leave details of who they are. Or they might leave a card and someone may not be able to read it in English or may not be literate. So therefore it's impossible perhaps to track back or even bring that information to a support group. Unsurprisingly, there's a lack of trust in the system, a concern as soon as there's contact with social workers once children are removed. And actively seeking support from the social care system is very rare. Where it does occur, it's usually because someone's already in contact with an NGO, and it quite often, perhaps they've got a disabled relative or child, and the NGO says, oh look, I can help you apply for some welfare benefits from that, and then from there on they can perhaps access some other services. I've already talked about system illiteracy. There's also a strong theme of the inability to comprehend the assessment system or recognise what is perceived of as good parenting within the UK model, or even understand the concepts associated with parenting, which are causing major problems to the social workers. We've got a real culture gap. And then translation services. You see here, this in the focus group, this man said the parents were asking for a Slovak Roma interpreter, and the social services bring him an Irish gypsy. Irish
gypsy have translated into
So, well, exactly. I mean, who knows? But I suppose they thought, put him down as a gypsy, and they went, oh, we've got this Irish traveller. Yes, he can come. And I suppose the social services presumably perceived of it as being some sort of cultural interpretation rather than linguistic, which really shocked me when I heard that one, as you can imagine. I'll ask him to. Okay, again, issues here about translators. And this is something which has come out in a number of other projects I've been involved in with refugees, for example. People bringing prejudices and biases. So we have here an NGO staff member talking about a Slovak interpreter, talking about these people. It's not only a child, but a disabled child with complex needs, and they're being referred to as these people. And a lot of sort of culturally negative presumptions made. I'll just skip through this very quickly. Medical and dental care is often a trigger for social work involvement. And again, these issues around not necessarily being registered with a GP because people don't have appropriate documentation or no fixed address. And there's an emphasis time and again that social workers often fail to see the bigger picture because of the lack of cultural knowledge. So again, this suggestion they need long-term support rather than these sort of short-term punitive interventions which are simply to do with dealing with a situation immediately and perhaps moving into a care. The other thing that's not recognised by professionals is that there's key differences between different Roma populations, their country of origin, their own culture, whether they arrive on their own or are largely unsupported or in a community group. And this is something that came out from the focus group with Roma people. For example, the Polish saying, yeah, well, you know, they're different from us, the Romanian, they've just come here, they're often experiencing more poverty. And NGOs can hold this important role as mediator. Yeah, I've talked here about the lack of contact, stereotypes. The media obviously has a role to play here, as we saw in some of the earlier slides. Often social care professionals will attempt to mould a Roma to a normative family model. It's something that's perceived of as being English and quite mainstream. That's something that seems to come out, and not recognising different family patterns. So here we have quite a long quote, but an important one. And this is from an NGO staff member who spoke about a phone call that she received, a solicitor representing a Roma mother who'd been taken to custody and a child removed. And the child was removed because she was arrested on, she said, suspicion of torturing the child, and she asked why. And she says it's because the child was so malnourished. So you've got those pre-migration circumstances, and unless someone actually knew about the circumstances, you know, they wouldn't understand about the degree of poverty. So this NGO intervened, they sent paperwork to the lawyer, they talked about the situation. And this woman said it was just so terrifying. Here's someone trying to bring about a better life for her child, and instead she comes straight into contact, negative contact with social workers because of the circumstances of the child and the poverty. Okay. Another couple of quotes here from community members talking about being accused of neglecting a child, for example, being constantly monitored if a child's in school or not, a child having an accident, and they say, you know, social workers say it was neglect and being visited each week to check. Again, someone talking about the idea of a child being able to be naked, for example. And we heard in presentation earlier about, with the Calais missionaries actually sort of making the same sort of comments and sensing here's a child naked and running around. And what we're saying is this man, I think, no, it's a woman, from the Manchester interview, was saying no matter how poor you are, you still look after your children. In Romania, children don't have shoes or many clothes, but the social workers don't just rush in and take them. Social workers try and help. But in this country, children are taken away, and obviously that narrative passes through and it creates more fear and suspicion. So what did the social workers say? Have I got 2 minutes? Social workers in terms of the interviews, the sort of the e-survey, well, 86% of them said they've actually had no access to training and working with Roma before they had a client group and they received Roma clients. Only two of the social workers actually spoke any Romanist dialect. They talked about the speed of assessments. You've got the 21 days to turn around an assessment and make a decision on someone's life. They didn't know where to go for advice. They wanted additional training. And they also said clients were resistant to engaging with interventions. So, for example, asking someone to go to parenting classes, and one person we interviewed talked about a woman being told she had to go to parenting classes to avoid a child being taken to care. And this she understood through a translation as sex education. She said, well, that's dirty. Obviously, I can't go to sex education. I'm a mother. Why do I need this? So she refused to go. And social workers interpreted this as being resistant to engaging. Okay, and again, this confusion about what is a family in deep poverty, what is actually a family who are behaving in a manner which would not be acceptable within a Roma community, and what is Roma culture. So it's very, very confusing for social workers. 14 out of 21 talked about absolute, total, utter destitution of Roma clients. Nowhere to live, no food, no access to welfare benefits. Poor quality housing, a large number of people, and also homelessness. And nearly all social workers, they don't have enough training. Okay, or knowledge even amongst anyone they can speak to. NGO, from their sample of the training they provided, I think there's 2 slides left, I'm nearly there. So they said that social workers talked about these as being the key issues within the internal training sessions provided by the NGO. And I won't bother reading through, but you can see that there's issues about trafficking comes up once again, children at risk of sexual exploitation, needs not in education, employment or training, so children are out of school. Lack of what's regarded as play and stimulation for under 5s, which is an issue just came up in the case I was looking at this morning. High mobility, how do you track and make sure a child's safe or the family going to return home, and families being scared. Okay, I'll just skim through, well, I'll just really float through these, but you can see here about poor housing, lack of access to benefits, leading to family becoming destitute, living in a damaged caravan in a car under a railway bridge, and social workers then moving it, taking the children into care. And this is, again, it's a destitution, homelessness situation. I'm sorry about flicking through quickly, but these are the access. Another one, another woman migrating. She had lack of insurance, lots of health problems, med-examined child, police were called, and the family actually fled. They went home to avoid case, and the NGO were concerned that this case would then follow because they were told a report was being made to the authorities in the family's hometown. Okay, so what's the policy conclusions? Well, more training, the fact that there needs to be improvements. I'll just reply through. There's a lot of issues here in terms of the anti-migration debate and cuts, downgrading inclusion health, uncertainty over government plans, and linkages between Home Office and Department of Welfare, work and pensions, which means that people claim benefits, that there's increased risk of being essentially deported through administrative removal processes, and often taking children to care as a threat to make someone leave. So what do we say? Enhanced training and co-production of Roma culture and community social work, increased awareness on rights and processes, early intervention, good practice transfer internationally, multi-agency approach to deal with things such as poverty, community development, and improved access to translation services. And that's it so far.